Herzlich willkommen zum 36. Internationalen DOK.fest München. A very warm welcome to the 36th DOK.fest Munich. My name is Daniel Lang. I'm going to host this Q&A from the Silbersaal in the Deutsches Theater, which is usually one of our locations. And this year, it's our online edition, DOK.fest at Home 2021. I'm going to be speaking to the director, Samarth Mahajan. His film, The Borderlands, will have the world premiere in the DOK Horizonte section. Welcome, Samarth.
Thank you so much for having me here. Although obviously we can't meet in person, but it's a privilege to just be talking to you and talking about our film.
Samarth, when talking about borderlands in India, the discussion usually centers around conflict or nationalism. And why did you choose to leave out these topics of your film, or these aspects in your film?
So, one of the core motivations of doing this project was that if you see in India and also globally, our conversations around border areas have become very detached from personal narratives. Like every time, at least in India, we talk about borders, we are told that, see, you know, our army is fighting on the borders. Whenever we talk about real issues, we are just told that, you know, we should sacrifice, we should forget every other issue and just focus on securing our borders. And all the conversation is about either the army or the terrorists. I come from a border area myself, so I know that there are very specific things that happen because of borders in personal lives, not purely on a political arena, but in a way that, you know, there's a personal politics to borders which is not talked about, which is to do with everyday people, which is to do with common people. And the idea of the film was to do that. I do believe that in certain ways, all the stories capture some sort of violence, but that violence is on the individual, probably. It is not a cross-border like violence in terms of a war. But if you see every story, I think just to not be able to see your loved ones for 364 out of the 365 days is some sort of violence that borders inflict on people. And that is the kind of violence which we don't talk about. So, and there are already a lot of films which are about wars, which are about insurgency. So I really wanted to keep it very personal and grounded in everyday experiences.
You wanted to keep the film very personal. You included your family, your mother, in the film as one of the protagonists. How did that come about? Why did you choose her? Why did you say, "Mum, can you be in my film?"
So that actually stemmed from a very informal conversation with my mother. So my home is about 10 miles away from the India-Pakistan border. And my mother was born in a border district, and she got married into a family which is in a border district. And then she talked about how she had never seen a border. And one of the things that I wanted to do with the film was not just talk about political borders, but in every story I wanted to keep a sense of a personal border, by which I mean an axis of marginalization or identity. So with my mother is the most typical Indian homemaker that you will meet. Like if you show her part to any Indian, they'll be like, "Oh, that's like my mother." So with her, I thought there was a scope to bring out this female experience of borders, where not only do women not many times have a world outside the home or beyond their husband or sons. At the same time, they're made into these figures, you know. There's this concept of Bharat Mata, Mother India. So I really wanted to sort of comment indirectly on that Mother India idea. And in fact, when I take her to a border, you see that she's very patriotic. And in some ways, she takes validation from that whole idea. So I wanted to talk about those things, you know, how women in some ways are made into Mother India, and yet they sort of don't have a life. And for me personally, it was also a way of overcoming a personal border between her and me. As she says, we were in a very rough stage of our relationship where I was so busy doing all these filmmaking things, that many times, we were out of touch. I was not picking her calls, not messaging her. So it was just a way of coming close to my mother, and I think that was my personal takeaway from just being able to work with my mother on this film.
And has your relationship changed, you think, because you made this film?
I do think, in a very twisted way, I do tell my mother that I'm very connected to my film and my characters. And this is the first time I've attempted something very personal. And I usually tell her, see, now you are a character in my film, now I'm much more connected to you. But in also a sense, when I showed the film to my mother and my relatives, they could see her reality in a very different way. Because when you're living as a family, many times you just take things for granted. But to be able to sit back and see her situation and what kind of a world she resides in was something that I think changed her relationship with everyone. To be honest, I had never woken up at 6 a.m. to see what my mother does. And this film, in some ways, made me do that.
Okay.
Like the amount of effort she puts in, even to, before everyone, leaves, she can't eat. And that's sort of captured in a montage, that she gets up at 6 a.m., she cooks everyone's meals. Only when my father and my brother have left for office does she have like her breakfast. So even those realizations were something that hit me after I made it.
You have a lot of protagonists in your film. They speak a lot of different languages. And the first question may be, how did you find all these people? And then also a second one that also relates to that. How did you manage all these different languages? Because I'm sure that wasn't easy.
Yeah, so there was a process to it. In terms of, we were a two-people direction team. I had an associate director. Her name is Nupur Agarwal. And what both of us used to do was, we used to essentially shortlist some themes which will be interesting to explore. So it was really like internet research and talking to journalists and seeing what kind of organizations are operating in these areas and identifying certain themes, after which we would go on a recce and, for example, even with the character who's divided from her family at the border, at the India-Bangladesh border, who gets to meet her family only once a day, we found out that there's this event where people are allowed to come near the fence and meet once a year. And then it was about visiting these villages, and it was like a casting process. We would just see, like go to the village, talk to the village head who would introduce us to the community, and we would just see who's opening up to us, who, I really like people who smile, who have a certain personality, a certain vibe. So we would see who we are gelling with, who we are vibing with, and then we would shoot with people. So we would shoot with 3-4 people and then see which people are sort of working for us, who's connecting to us, who's opening up. And that's how we would shortlist people. In terms of languages, in fact, at every location that we went, I would have a local associate director. So, and funnily, all of them were women because, I just felt that it happened by chance, but I think it's easier for them to sort of empathize, given that, a lot of things that they face in general in life in India. So the process was just that I did not want a translator. I did not want to sit with someone and have these conversations. What I used to do was pass on the feeling and emotion of the story, and then they would form their own relationships. So I had an associate director in Bengal. I had an associate director in Nepal and the Northeast. So that's how we tackled the different languages part. So it was really like this direction team that we created, which worked together.
I found it very interesting that you had so many female protagonists. Was that by chance, or did that just happen, or because they were the ones who opened up more than the men, or how did that come about?
So it was totally not planned, and I think there were 2 factors at play. One thing is that in border areas, I think, especially in Indian border areas, I think men are much more guarded. especially they're very suspicious of why you want to interview them, especially at the India-Pakistan border or the India-Bangladesh border. I saw that it was difficult for them to trust our crew very easily. And secondly, also because most of these relationships, as I said, because we had associate directors who were women. So I think that also fed into more women being in the film. When we came back, I think the first cut had 7 characters, out of which 2 were men and 5 were women. And we just realized that the women characters were much more emotionally powerful. Like even now, I think in the film, the story of the Manipuri filmmaker, it's not as emotionally powerful. But what it does, it sort of gives you a break between the whole emotional flow. It's like a novelty in that sense. So I think these 2 factors fed into more women being there in the film.
Okay. Was it? We have some issues?
I think I lost electricity. I live in a very remote part, very close to the border.
Okay.
In the Pakistan border, so we don't have electricity 24/7.
So okay.
Is it okay?
Yeah, it's okay. We'll continue. Ich glaube, was it a power outage or what was it?
Yeah. It was a power.
Okay. It happens. Was it difficult to get your film past the CBFC, like the regulatory body that you have in India? I've heard that it's quite difficult sometimes to get like their stamp without any censorship, basically. And I imagine because your film does touch a sensitive issue, which is borders in India, which is always a sensitive issue, especially with Pakistan, but also Bangladesh, and you have Kashmir, you have like all these basically areas of conflict. Was it difficult to get like your stamp so that you can show the film?
So in our edit process, especially, we were we've been seeing a lot of Iranian cinema, and we are very inspired by how they operate in very strict censorship regimes. And I just love how they're able to say very complicated things without making it about a certain person, a certain party. And that was our approach, really. We didn't want to point fingers, and we wanted to let the audience understand the politics, and also a politics which is intergenerational and not necessarily rooted in the present political landscape. So I think that's why it sort of passed through the censor board certification process. And we in fact got a U certificate, which means that even kids can watch the film, and it can freely play at any time on any channel.
Very good. You have two of your protagonists. One of them, I think, is at the Nepalese border. She basically is trying to stop human trafficking. And then you have a story in Kolkata about a home for women who have been trafficked and who have been sort of taken out of this vicious cycle, basically. Was that an idea from the beginning, or did that happen, or how did that come about? That these two stories, although they are thousands of kilometers apart, really interrelate?
So I'm really glad that you noticed this thing about the film. We were basically shooting in parts. So we first shot on the India-Pakistan border and then on the India-Bangladesh border. And how we were doing it was we were researching for that phase. So before the India-Pakistan border, we were only reading and wrecking the India-Pakistan border. So we already had the shelter home story of Noor before we started approaching the Nepal border. So once we started reading about it, and trafficking is a big thing on the India-Nepal border. So, and then we found out that, okay, there are these women who are actually saving other women. And somehow we just imagined that what if when Noor was crossing the border from India-Bangladesh, the India-Bangladesh border, what if someone like Noor, someone like Kavita saved her? Kavita is our Nepali character. And although that doesn't happen in reality, we thought that what if in the film we were able to create that possibility? if Nepal is doing a certain thing to stop trafficking from Nepal to India, could it be done on the Bangladesh border? And are these lives connected? So that's a thought which came up while we were researching the Nepal border. And luckily, we were able to keep that in the edit also. And that was the idea, because none of these lives are overtly connected. They are only connected through aspirations, context, and very intangibly. So in that sense, this connection got made while approaching our research in Nepal, and luckily it did work out on that.
And in the editing process, was the editing process a difficult one or an easy one? Because you have very disparate storylines, you have very, very disparate protagonists that are miles apart, basically. And to sort of weave a story with these people, how did you go about doing that?
So I think the first problem is that I shoot a lot. So we actually had about 12 or 13 protagonists, from which we had to choose the 6 protagonists. So that was an important thing, because we had to let go of some characters. We also didn't want to fill in a lot of characters in the film. So once we had the 6 to 7 characters, what we were trying to do was create an emotional flow in a way, and not very explicit. And we did not want maps in the film in a very, there are maps in the film, but they're basically lines. We did not want geographical maps. So what we were trying to look for was very subtle connections in the characters. So we thought that, okay, Deepa, who's our character who's come from Pakistan to India, she has an aspiration. She wants to become a doctor. And we have my mother, who had a certain aspiration, wanted to become a teacher, but couldn't. So in a certain way, their personal lives are connected. And like you pointed out, Kavita and Noor's life is connected through the thread of trafficking. So we were looking for those kind of threads, and it was an iterative process. We were, putting one character after another and changing those things. And it was, I think after 3 or 4 drafts, we were sure that, okay, this is what we want to settle for. Yeah. Okay. But it's something that, like, we had to just watch the film a lot of times with different kind of setups and take breaks in between, because we did end up watching it a lot of time while on the edit. So obviously our subjectivity started coming in, and my editor just wanted me to chill for a week and not do anything, so that, I could lose my subjectivity again and come back to the film with a fresh eye. Yeah.
So India is famous for its fictional films, it's famous for Bollywood, but what is it like for documentary filmmakers? Do you have an audience? Is it easy to get money to make documentary films in India? What's the situation there like now?
So to be honest, it's a very nascent market. It's a very, it's almost non-existent in a way, because documentaries rarely get shown in theaters. There are very few TV slots for documentaries, but I think things are improving. With respect to our film, raising funds was a task. In fact, more than half of the money was raised through crowdfunding. There are 550 people across 8 to 10 countries who've contributed money. And after that, we were able to find a co-producer, and luckily we were able to raise funds for this film. But there aren't many films coming out of India at this budget or at this scale. Things are improving in a way, because Netflix has started buying Indian documentaries. Like, obviously we see a lot of international documentaries from Europe and US on our Netflix also. But one of the producers on this film is going to release their documentary series next month on Netflix India, which is a step towards making Indian audiences comfortable with the idea of watching a creative documentary. One of the things that India suffers from, we had this government department called Films Division, and they used to make educational documentaries and stitch them to the beginning of a Bollywood film and then show it in a theater. So they kept on doing it through 60s and 70s. So as soon as you say the word documentary, people think it's boring, it's educational. So the word itself is sort of abused. So we are working on changing that.
I wish you luck. I wish you luck.
Thank you.
Samarth, I'm afraid our time is up, but thank you very, very much for this conversation. And I wish you all the best for your wonderful film. To our audience, if you like this film, you can basically vote for it. You can cast your vote for the Kino Audience Award from BR and Dreisat, and you just go to our homepage to do that. And you have the chance to watch the Borderlands until the 23rd of May. Thank you very much.